All right. So again, it's not our usual Wednesday night, but we are picking back up with our Walking with the King Bible study series on this Tuesday edition. And we are going to be in verse 29 through 39 of Mark chapter number 1. So Mark chapter number 1, verses 29 through 39 is where we're going to be at on tonight. So as we come to these verses, we're going to begin to see a deeper picture, if you will, of how Jesus actually operates in ministry. And we're going to see what exactly is important to Jesus in ministry as well. And hopefully we'll understand how those things should be important to us in our various endeavors in ministry. Now, up until this point, we have watched Jesus teach with divine authority in the synagogue, which was where the last week's lesson took place, and he has demonstrated power over those unclean spirits. Now the scene shifts from the public space of worship in the synagogue to the private space of miracle working in the home of his newly chosen disciple, Simon Peter. And what we discover here in this lesson, in these handful of verses, we're going to understand and discover that the authority of Jesus that was given to him by the Father, this divine authority of Jesus, is not limited to just dramatic moments that are seen in the public eye. Jesus's authority that's given to him by the Father, it extends into everyday life. So everyday life, Jesus doesn't need the huge spotlight in the public eye to work miracles and to deliver and cast out demons. He does, we're going to see that he does these things on an everyday basis in everyday life. So what makes this section right here is so important to us is that it's going to reveal the unique rhythm of Jesus's ministry. We're going to see him moving from um, compassion to crowds, showing compassion to the crowds, to going into solitude for a time of prayer. And so this is hopefully going to challenge the way that we approach ministry, where we leave this Bible study tonight realizing and understanding that ministry is not just something that we should be doing when we have a large crowd around us. And if we are the type of person that needs a crowd, if we actually need a crowd and we um have the desire for a spotlight to be on us in order to minister, then maybe, just maybe, we have not been called to minister the way that we think we are. Maybe God has not actually called us, because we're going to see that the crowd does not dictate the flow of our ministry. It should not dictate the flow of our ministry. So there are going to be 5 movements that we're going to see in the text tonight, 5 movements of 5 sections, and then we're going to be done. So we're in verses 29 through 39. We're going to break this up into 5 sections. So section 1, or part 1 as we can call it, we're going to be looking at verses 29 through 31, which is going to be talking about the personal touch of Jesus, the personal touch of Jesus. So we're going to see a very familiar word here at the beginning of verse number 29. And if you have been following since week 1, since the very first lesson, you'll notice this word: immediately. Immediately. So this right here again is the theme of the gospel written by John Mark, because it is believed that Mark, as he writes this gospel, he is basically giving us a, a, a review, or what he saw and what he heard while he was around Simon Peter when he preached. So we know that Peter is somebody that just moved oftentimes without thinking. He just did whatever came to mind. And so his sermons were just action-packed and quick moving. And so this gospel, which is a retelling of many of his sermons, it moves quickly. So Mark moves quickly from the synagogue, which is where last week's lesson took place, into a home. Notice what he says here, verse 29, and immediately he left the synagogue and entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. That transition right there, that swift, quick transition from the synagogue to Simon and Andrew's house, is important. We shouldn't overlook this. It's important because Jesus goes from a public setting where he demonstrated authority in front of a crowd into a private setting where only a few people were allowed to be present, or only a few people were present. This reminds us that the ministry of Jesus is not confined to just church-based settings. He does not just move in structured church environments. He moves in our homes, in everyday life, and in our personal situations. Same authority that amazed the crowd is now about to meet a very personal need in the privacy of this home. So this shows us that Jesus Christ is not distant from us. He is actually accessible always to us, because he doesn't just need the comfort of the synagogue, or what we would call today the church, to move. Mark continues and tells us why Jesus is in this house, or what happens while he's in there. He says, now Simon Peter's mother-in-law laid ill with a fever, and they immediately told him about her. So we learned something about Peter real quickly here. Peter is married. So um but which is revealed in the fact that he has a mother-in-law. Now, Peter's mother-in-law um is very ill, and the Bible says that she has a fever. We can't gloss over that right there, because in that particular culture, a fever was something serious. This was not a minor thing in this culture. This was serious. I want to show you how serious it was back then compared to today. So today, a fever is still something that you should be concerned with, and you should handle it, as quickly as possible and with immediate attention. But if you get a fever today, all you got to do is take a Tylenol or something like that to break the fever. Lay down, drink your lot of electrolytes and fluids and things like that to keep yourself hydrated. And pretty soon, um, unless it requires you to go to the doctor or something, you're going to start to feel better. That fever is going to break. But this is back then, biblical days. They don't have the benefit of of modern medication. There's no air condition. This house is not air conditioned. They don't have any kind of cold, ice cold fluids that you can drink. There's no Tylenol that Peter's mother-in-law could have taken to break this fever. So when you caught a fever back then, when you had a fever back then, this was a real immediate concern. And oftentimes it became life threatening. People lost their lives because of fever. So you can see the seriousness, the severity of this situation. So notice the response of those in the house here. The Bible says that they immediately bring the need to Jesus. They immediately make Jesus aware of what is going on with Peter's mother-in-law. That's simple, but it's a profound, powerful picture of faith that is established very early here in the lives of these disciples and the ministry of Jesus here. They notice here that they didn't try to fix the situation themselves. They didn't try to say, oh, well, it's going to pass eventually. They saw a need and they took the need immediately to Jesus. That is a reminder for us today that Jesus is not just around for the big, severe public crisis. He is also in our lives for our personal, private struggles as well. Remember last week, he's in the synagogue. This is a major issue that pops up there. There's a man possessed of a demon. Unclean spirit is in him. He is tormented. That is major. Now we have a woman that probably is on the older side and she got a fever. You could probably try to weigh those two things and think, well, the demon is more important than the fever. No, this shows us that Jesus cares about anything and everything that could possibly interfere with our happiness, with our joy, and with our peace. How do we know that? We know that because First Peter chapter 5, verse number 7 says this right here. It says, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Notice that Peter didn't just say cast some of your anxieties or cast the major anxiety. He said cast all of your anxieties on him, for he cares for you. I imagine that Peter was writing that, he was probably in his mind, he may have been thinking about this situation very early on with his mother-in-law. How this may have been seen as a trivial issue to some people, but Jesus immediately steps in and says, because y'all care about it, I care about it. But then Mark moves on and says he came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. And watch what happens. The fever um, left her, and she began to serve him. This moment here is full of the compassion, the love, the care, and the authority of Jesus all wrapped together at the same time. Jesus does not heal from a distance. He steps over and he touches her. He touches her. He takes her by the hand, lifts her up. He touches her. Don't miss this, because this is an important, impactful aspect of the Christ that we're trying to walk with through this series. He does not mind touching those who come to him with a need. Why is that important? It's important because in that particular day and time, touching somebody who was sick basically made you unclean. That means even if they had a common cold or had sinuses, allergies, whatever it was, if you touched them, it was just like you were just as unclean as they were. You were ceremonially unclean. So back in those days, you didn't touch sick people. You didn't even want to be around sick people because it made you ceremonially unclean. But notice here that Jesus is not concerned with any of that kind of stuff. That is not his concern. That's not his care. Instead of him being worried that her condition was going to negatively affect him, he realizes that his power, that he has the power to overcome her condition. Instead of him being worried about the public eye seeing that her condition affects him, he says, no, my power is able to overcome her condition. And that's a blessing right there for us tonight, to know that that's the kind of Savior that we have right there. That's the kind of God that we serve. The kind of God that does not mind reaching down and touching us, even in our sickness, even in our pain, even in our infirmities, even in our sin. He is able to reach down and lift us up. Now, he takes her by the hand and he lifts her up. Now, that is not just healing. That right there in itself is personal care. It's personal care. Now, it shows us that Jesus is not just only powerful enough to heal, but he's also powerful enough to draw us near while he is healing. Mark finished this little verse right here, this section or this narrative of him healing Peter's mother-in-law by giving us an important detail to what I just said. Jesus is powerful enough to heal, but when he heals, he's also powerful enough to draw us near to him. How do we know that? Notice what Mark says at the end of this discord. He says, and she began to serve them. She began to serve them. The healing here is immediate. It's an immediate healing, but it's also a complete healing. Jesus doesn't cut or turn or bypass any kind of corners at all. This is immediate. It happens right then and right there. That means that there is no recovery period necessary. There is no quarantine period necessary. There is no gradual improvement. She goes from being bedridden with a fever to being up on her feet, actively serving. That shows us the fullness of what Jesus actually does. This means that when Jesus restores us, he doesn't cut corners. He restores us fully and completely. But it also reveals something to us about our responsibility to the Lord when he restores us. This shows us that there is a proper way to respond to the miracles that the Lord performs in our lives. She does not just feel better after the miracle, but feeling better makes her serve better. She doesn't just feel better, she begins to serve better. Her Jesus restoring her leads her to get on her feet and become active in serving the Lord. Restoration, it should lead to serving. Restoration should lead to action. Restoration shouldn't just lead to you being stagnant and remaining the way that you always have been. It should lead to a change. It should lead to an action. This right here is a picture of discipleship in its purest form. When Jesus Christ lifts you up out of your situation, the natural response to be should be for you to use what he has just blessed you with and what he has just given you to actively serve others. This means that whatever you have been dealing with, whatever you do deal with, whatever you will deal with, when the Lord brings you out of it, he is not just bringing you out of it for you to be selfish and keep it all to yourself and for you to just remain in the same spot, in the same area that you've always been in. He delivers you and brings you out so that you can be so that you can be a blessing to others, so that you can serve others. So we see here the personal touch of Jesus, the personal touch of Jesus, but then we move on to the public demand. So verses 32 through 34 shows us another shift. This is a real fast moving gospel here, and we see another quick shift because the narrative takes us from the quiet, secluded, private space of Peter and Andrew's house to now a growing moment in the public. Notice what Mark says here. It says that at verse 32, it says that evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick and everybody that was oppressed by these demons. Time here is important. Notice the timing right there. The first couple words, first 4 words, that evening at sundown. That evening at sundown. Time matters. Why does this time matter? It matters because the Sabbath day is where last week's lesson took place when he was in the synagogue teaching. Sabbath day has just now ended when sundown went down. So according to the Jewish calendar, the day didn't end when midnight hit, and the new day didn't the day didn't end and the new day didn't begin just when midnight hits like it does for us and on our calendar. The day was established from when the sun rose and the sun went down. So the Sabbath day has now ended, even though it's still Saturday, technically on our calendar. The Jewish calendar said the sun went down. It's a new day now. It's the first day of the week. So the Sabbath has just not ended because the sun went down. And now the people here, because the Sabbath ended, they are free to travel and carry the sick according to their traditions. Because remember, according to the tradition and in which they made based off of the commandment, you should honor the Sabbath and keep it holy. They took that and turned it into a tradition that said you can't do any kind of work at all on the Sabbath. So in this particular case, according to tradition, it would have been unlawful for a person to be healed on the Sabbath day, because in order for them to be healed, you would have had to pick them up, carry them to Jesus. This is an issue right here that shows us the issue with tradition. When tradition interferes with deliverance, then that tradition becomes an issue. I know that we have, every church got their own kind of little quirky traditions and things like that, but your traditions should never interfere with a person's deliverance, with a person's salvation, with a person's breakthrough, with a person's um, meeting with Jesus Christ. When the tradition starts to interfere with a person's spiritual growth and a person's relationship with Christ, then that tradition becomes an issue. Their tradition was an issue because they had to wait till the sun went down and a new day to begin for them to bring this their sick people to Jesus. But nonetheless, this is when they choose to bring them. So let's look at what the text said. They bring him here, and what we see is not just a random gathering. This is a response to what they have just heard or seen take place. Remember, they are in Capernaum. What did we say Capernaum was in last week's lesson? It was a thriving little busy place. So word was quick to get around there. So you got to imagine how quick this word would have got around. You know, this woman is sick, near death, got a fever, and all this man did was just reach out, grab her hand, and pull up out the bed, and now she 100% healthy. Word like that spread. And so it quickly spread about what Jesus did in the synagogue. Because you got to remember, it was people inside that synagogue that heard him teach with this amazing authority. They ain't never heard no teaching like that before. And then you got to understand, there were people there that seen this man who has been coming there Sabbath after Sabbath with this demon up inside of him, this unclean spirit inside of him. And then all of a sudden, this unclean spirit is casted out. So he has done all of these things, taught with authority, casted out the demon, and now healed a woman that was approaching death by way of a fever. Word and spread. And so now the community is beginning to move, and they want to see what all the hype is about. They're probably thinking, well, if he did all that, I might as well, bring so-and-so on over there to him and see if he can heal him. Let me see what he can do for this loved one or this family member or this friend. Let me even see what he can do for me myself. So when the people heard about this, the scriptures say that they began to bring all who were sick and oppressed by demons. They brought all of them to him. So they brought, basically what is happening, they're bringing all of their problems to him. Mark then says, and the whole city, not just some of the city, every word is important. The whole city was gathered at the door. What started off as a little personal moment in Peter's house is now turned into a citywide scene, a citywide spectacle here. The door becomes a meeting point between the private space and Peter's home and the public need of all of those people outside. People coming from everywhere, bringing all kind of issues to the Lord: sickness, suffering, spiritual oppression. And this shows us something important about human nature. What does it show us? When people are hurting, they will seek out anybody that they believe has the power to help them with their problem. Let me say that again. When people are hurting, they will seek out anybody, anyone. It don't matter who it is. If they believe that person can help them with their problem, they will seek them out. We know this to be true because, Jesus has just bursted onto the scene. He is new to Capernaum right here. These folk don't know him. For all they know, the word has spread, and you got to imagine how they have spreaded this word. For all they know, they've been around in the neighborhood talking about this random man who got an accent. He sounds like he's from Galilee because he got that Galilean accent. He dresses like he's from Galilee, looks like he's from Galilee. He has come here now, and he came to the synagogue, and he did this and did that. They don't know who he is. They're just describing this stranger that came and demonstrated divine power. And so, because they are desperate and sick, they're saying to themselves, I'm going to go to him as well. Again, that shows us that a hurting person becomes a desperate person. And when you are desperate for deliverance, you will literally try to seek out help from anybody that you believe has the power and authority to help you. Fortunately for these people, the person that they're seeking out is Jesus. So the presence of Jesus draws a crowd because an immediate need draws people to power. So Mark continues here. It says, and he healed many who were sick with various diseases and casted out many demons. Notice here the wide range of issues that Jesus is dealing with. Again, let's name them out: physical sickness, spiritual oppression. This means that the authority of the Lord is not just limited to one particular area. There is no one condition that is too complex or too great for Jesus to deal with. There is no one situation that the Lord only specializes in. Whether the issue is an issue of your body physically or whether it's an issue spiritually, Jesus has divine ultimate authority over all of it. This is Jesus bringing to pass what Isaiah prophesied back in Isaiah chapter 53, verse number 4 says, surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. He addresses the full weight of what grieves us and what sorrows us. These people are grieved because I imagine many of them have seen their sick die as a result of their sickness. These people are sorrowed because I imagine that many of them have loved ones in this crowd, or they may be the person themselves that is dealing with this spiritual inward issue that they just can't define, and they don't know what exactly it is, but they know it's hurting them and it's hindering them. So Isaiah 53 verse number 4 says he bears all those griefs and he carries all of those sorrows. He addresses the full complete weight of whatever it is that grieves us and sorrows us. But then Mark adds a very interesting detail here. Notice the last sentence of that verse that you see on the screen there. It says, and he would not permit the demons to speak because they knew him. He didn't permit the demons to speak because they knew him. Just like the synagogue, something very similar happens here. Remember, in the synagogue, the demon got to speak and calling Jesus by name, saying, why are you troubling us and all that. They calling Jesus by name. And what did Jesus do to that demon? He silenced it. He told it to shut up right then and there. He silenced it. So the same thing happens here. Even though the demons recognize who he is, Jesus does not allow them to testify. He does this and it reminds us that Jesus is in complete, total control of how his identity is actually revealed. This means that Jesus will never allow truth, or he does not allow truth to be spoken from a corrupted source. Jesus is not going to allow truth to be spoken from a corrupted source. The truth of who he is not going to come from no corrupted source. That is why, like last week, I told you that it's very important that we realize that everybody shouldn't be given a microphone and a platform to speak in God's house. Because even though they may be speaking something that might be true, yeah, God is a great God. God is a good God. God can heal. God can deliver. They are a corrupted source of that truth. because they really don't understand what they're talking about. Jesus shows us he silences this demon as a way to show us that that truth will not be allowed to be spoken from a corrupted source. And also, he will not allow his mission to be misunderstood or prematurely defined. Because a lot of times when people speak in church, they get carried away and they start saying a whole bunch of inaccurate nonsense that can ultimately lead people away or distort their view of God. His authority is not is not something that can be spoken through this corrupted, uh, blatantly sinful source. So he silences this demon. His authority is not just over sickness and demons. This shows us that his authority is over revelation itself. Jesus is very careful about who he allows to speak his truth, who he allows to reveal his identity to the people. So the crowd is growing. The needs of the crowd are increasing. And the power of Jesus is becoming more and more undeniable. From the outside looking in, this looks like the perfect opportunity for Jesus to stay and build momentum and expand his influence. From the outside looking in, this is something that we would get happy about. We got a crowd now. There's a crowd. I'm really doing something. The people have really come to see me. But what we are about to see here is that the crowd does not control Jesus. Jesus is not concerned with the crowd. He is not driven by the demands of the crowd. He does not, we're about to see that he does not measure the success of his ministry by the crowd. That is important because Jesus understands that not everyone who comes with good intentions. Or let me say it this way. Jesus understands that everybody who comes to him, everybody who came to him out of this crowd, rather, everybody in this crowd has not come with the same sincere and pure intentions. Some of them came in faith. Some came out of desperation. And some came mostly because of what they have heard. But again, this shows us that the presence of a crowd does not equal the presence of commitment. That's why we today in our churches don't get too excited when you get a big crowd on Sunday. And don't get discouraged when you have a small crowd on Sundays, because the crowd does not dictate the success of the ministry that's going on there. Here's what this situation shows us. These people came because of what they have just heard Jesus doing, healing the demon possessed man and all of that. So they wanted to see what the hype was about. So everybody in this crowd was not sincere. They were just coming because of what they could get from Jesus, not because they wanted to serve Jesus. I want you to think about your church. When do you typically have the biggest crowds at your church? Probably when you have some type of established program there. Because the people gonna come. If you have a program every Sunday and you serving refreshments and chicken and cake and all of that, and you giving people platforms to speak on the program, I'm pretty sure that you're gonna have a crowd every Sunday, because that's what they're coming to do. They're coming to eat and get a plate and to be seen. They're not coming to worship the Lord, which again is why Jesus shows us here, don't become consumed by the size of the crowd. Don't let the big, large, overflowing crowd swell your head up and make you conceited, and don't let the small 2 or 3 that are gathered cause you to be discouraged. But nonetheless, Jesus got a crowd here. What is he going to do now that he has this large crowd? Let's see here. Private prayer. Mark chapter 1 verse 35 is where we're at. So what does he do? What does he do with this large crowd that he has? After this long night of ministry, where he's been healing the sick, casting out these demons, Mark gives us a real surprising shift here. He writes, and rising very early in the morning, while it was still dark, he departed and went out to a desolate place, and there he prayed. There's a lot of things that should stand out to you through that scripture. But one thing that should stand out is the immediacy of the timing here. After pouring himself out, emptying himself out for all these other people, he does not sleep in, try to catch a few more hours of sleep. He doesn't just try to rest and recover physically. He makes it a priority to spend time with the Father through prayer before his next move is even made. And we about to see he finna make some moves before the next crowd gathers, and there's gonna be some more bigger crowds. What he does is he withdraws. He goes all by himself. This tells us something very powerful about the rhythm of Jesus's life and ministry. He prioritized prayer. Here's what we should gather from this. Ministry does not replace intimacy with God. It actually requires it. Ministry does not replace intimacy with God. Ministry actually requires intimacy with God. There are a lot of great, powerful preachers and teachers and pastors who are popular and can draw crowds and all of that. But it's something to be said about the one that has a good prayer life, a consistent prayer life. That's one of the things that we should admire about Jesus, is that with everything he had going on, he always made time for prayer. Amongst the business meetings, amongst the financial planning, amongst the revivals, amongst the itinerant preaching, amongst the Bible studies, amongst the sermons, amongst the photo shoots, and all of these things that, you know, the average preacher may engage in on a weekly or daily basis, prayer should always be present. Because, again, ministry does not replace your relationship and your closeness with God. It requires you to have a relationship and be close to him. Mark says that Jesus woke up early that morning and he went off to a desolate place while it was still dark. Desolate place. Now, desolate place here means it was a solitary, quiet space away from people. This was intentional, because after being surrounded by the crowds, the noise, and the constant demand, he created distance so he can focus on having communion with the Father. This was not some accidental alone time. It was chosen time alone with God. He purposely set this time aside. He scheduled it. He planned it in advance. He was not running from the people. He was running to God. He was running to prayer. Now, this was not something that Jesus just did every now and again. Luke chapter 5, verse 16 says that this was a pattern that Jesus had. Luke chapter 5, verse 16 says it this way, but he would withdraw to desolate places and pray. It was his habit. I want you to notice that Jesus always prayed consistently, but there are a few moments that are highlighted within the scripture that shows us that Jesus prayed specifically and definitely before some of the most important, powerful, impactful moments of his ministry. Think about him praying before he even went out to choose his 12 disciples back in the Gospel of Luke. I want you to think about before he uh the night that he knew he was about to get arrested and betrayed and later crucified. What does he do? He goes out to the Garden of Gethsemane and he prays because he knows that what he is about to get ready to endure, he needs the strength to be able to handle being betrayed by one of his closest friends, his closest disciples, Judas. When Jesus was on the cross, he spoke 7 times. But notice the first words that come out of his mouth is a prayer. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. He prays before he takes his final breath on the cross. Jesus consistently met with God before the most difficult moments in his life. And if the Son of God, Jesus himself, had to make space for consistent, uninterrupted prayer, what does that say about you and I? Maybe the reason why we can't deal with the things that we face on a daily basis isn't because those things are too difficult for us to handle. It could be because we hadn't prayed for the strength to handle those things. Jesus goes out very early in the morning and he prays. Now, we make it here to section number 4. We're in verse 36, 37. We just got one more section. And we see the disciples issuing the pursuit and the misunderstanding that comes as a result of this pursuit of him. So basically what ends up happening here is the Bible says Simon and those who were with him searched for him. They found him and said to him, everyone is looking for you. Sound like a real simple statement. You know, they go out and find Jesus. He done went on way to pray, but this revealed a lot about what's happening in this moment. Disciples here are searching with urgency. The word searched here carries the idea in the Greek of pressing hard to find him. It carries the idea of picking up stones and turning them over to see what's underneath them. There's a sense of pressure in the building because the crowds from the night before, guess what? They ain't left. They still there. They're still waiting. They're still in need. They want to see Jesus do some more healing, do some more miracles. They want to see some more entertainment because a lot of them, they're entertained by this. They done probably brought some more people to take part in seeing this. And so because of this, the disciples see the crowd growing, and now they feel a responsibility to bring Jesus back to the crowd. And so when they find him, their message here is straightforward. Everyone is looking for you. Don't that sound like good news? Jesus, you done healed, you done set free people, you done delivered people, and now everybody's looking for you. That sounds like good news. Jesus, we got a crowd here. But remember what I just told you about crowds. Everybody that shows up in the crowd is not showing up for the right reason. From a human perspective, this is what you want. You want the crowd. You want the church to be packed on Sunday. You want the demand to be high. You want the visitors to be coming. This looks like influence. It looks like success, look like an opportunity to expand what is already started. But hidden in that statement that the disciples bring to Jesus is the misunderstanding of what Jesus came to do. Disciples are thinking in terms of popularity. Jesus is trying to operate in his purpose. Sometimes your purpose does not always equate popularity. Sometimes your purpose is not always going to lead to popularity. The moment here reveals how easy it can be for us to confuse the demands of people with the direction of God. Just because people are searching for you and looking for you and asking for you does not mean that's where you're supposed to go or where you're supposed to be at. Does not mean that's what you're supposed to do. That could be why Jesus just went off and prayed. Because in the midst of that prayer, he's talking to God. God is probably telling him, look, son, you're gonna have a crowd. But remember, I didn't send you down here to draw a crowd. I sent you down here to save my people. You're going to have a whole bunch of people coming to look for you. But remember, I didn't send you down here to just stand in the midst of a crowd and cast out demons and heal old women with fevers. I sent you here so that you could die on this cross for the sins of my people. So it's something about meeting with God that will redirect your direction and redirect you and show you what your ultimate true purpose is. The disciples are happy about popularity, but Jesus is trying to remind them of his purpose because he knows that many of these people that are looking for him are looking for him based on what he could do for them. They done seen the healings. They heard about the deliverance, and they want more of it. But wanting what Jesus can do for you is not the same as following who Jesus is. This is the same thing that happened in John chapter 6, verse 26, when Jesus said, truly, truly, I say to you, you were seeking me, not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of loaves. And remember from then, Jesus told them, he said, y'all searching for this physical bread, but he said, I am the bread of life. If you eat this bread that I'm trying to give you, you'll never hunger anymore. And you remember back at the end of John chapter 6, story ends with in John 6, verse 66 through 69, with Bible saying many of the disciples left him and followed, many of them left him and followed him no more. And he stays and looks at the 12 that are remaining and said, do y'all want to go too? And Peter said, Lord, where will we go? We believe that you are the Son of God and that you have words of eternal life. This shows us again that the crowd can be fickle. So don't let the crowd distract you from what God has actually called you to do. The disciples at this stage, though, they don't understand that. They're just excited about having all this attention on them. But Jesus reminds them again. He uses this as an opportunity or to remind them of what his actual purpose is. So he shows them the priority of the mission. This is Mark chapter 1, verses 38 through 39, 30 and 39. This are our last two verses here, and then we're done. So everyone is looking for you, is what they say. And notice his response reveals the clarity and the conviction of his ministry and of his mission, rather. Mark says, and he said to them, let us go on to the next towns that I may do what? Preach there. That I may preach there also. But that is why I came out. And he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons. What makes this right here such a powerful moment? What makes this such a powerful moment is that Jesus does not return to the crowd. He does not go back to where the demand was the highest or where the attention was growing. He just moves forward. This decision right here shows us that Jesus is not driven by popularity. Again, he is directed by his purpose. When he says, let us go on to the next towns, he's making it clear that his mission is bigger than just one location. The work of the kingdom is not meant to stay in one place. Even though there was still a multitude of people in Capernaum that were in great need, Jesus refused to limit his ministry to what was comfortable or familiar. This teaches us that obedience to God will often require movement. Serving God is not about you always being comfortable. If you have to be comfortable in order to serve God, then maybe you have not, then maybe you need to redirect and reevaluate your relationship with him. If you got to be comfortable to minister, and this ain't talking about just preaching, but ministering means singing in the choir, whether you're an usher at the church, whatever it is that you do, the hospitality committees, clean up the church, being on the kitchen committee, whatever it is, if you got to be comfortable in order to do it, then maybe you got to reevaluate whether or not God actually called you to do it, because serving God oftentimes is going to put you into some uncomfortable situations. So Jesus shows us here that I'm not just called to stay where it's comfortable in Capernaum. I got to go to these other towns where people are going to hate me, towns where people are going to question me, towns where people are going to accuse me of blasphemy and heresy. And we're going to see that later on in our study of this gospel. And so he went, as we end this, it says that he went throughout all Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons. So he proclaims the kingdom and he proves the kingdom everywhere he went, everywhere he was at. The message was the same. The mission did not change. It didn't matter the location or the audience. It was still the same. Jesus shows us that faithfulness is not measured by how many people are looking for you. Faithfulness is measured by whether or not you're walking in what God sent you to do. He leaves the crowd behind, not because the crowd didn't matter, but because his mission required movement. And that challenges us to ask ourselves tonight, are we staying in places where it feels successful? Or are we willing to go where God is actually sending us to? Are we staying in places where it feels comfortable? Or are we allowing God to take us to the places he's trying to send us to? Because true discipleship is not about chasing what's popular and what's comfortable. It's about us following what is purposeful. That's the title of this series. We're walking with the King. We can't just walk with him when it's comfortable in Capernaum. We got to get ready to walk with the King in these uncomfortable places as we see him continue to minister. So the crowds are always going to be there. The crowd are always going to have needs. They're always going to be present. There's always going to be people who desire something. But again, God tells Jesus where to go. So as he leaves there, there's going to be more crowds. There's going to be more people that are in need of him, more people that have demons, more people that have sicknesses. And we're going to see an example of that in next week's lesson. We will be back on regular schedule next week, Wednesday. We'll be back Wednesday of next week, back on regular schedule. And we're going to pick up in verses 40 through 45. So we're just going to have verses 40 through 45, just a couple quick verses, just 6 quick verses on next week, which we're going to be introduced to a leper. And this is going to show us even further how Jesus is called to heal and deliver those who have been casted out by society. So that's our lesson for this week. Thank you for joining me on this special Tuesday edition of Bible study. As I said, we'll be back on regular schedule on next week, Wednesday. So I pray this lesson was a blessing to you. And until next week, God bless you.